Just imagine this was your boyfriend or girlfriend. You saw them in this situation. I'm pretty sure your reaction wouldn't be, "Whew, that was pretty close, but luckily nothing bad happened."
Oh, you didn't screw up today.
Yes, you did. Just because you were interrupted doesn't mean you weren't about to screw it up. Cobra Kai has been one of my absolute favorites in the last couple of years. The continuation of the Karate Kid movies from the 80s captures the heart of the fans with its badass karate fights, ubiquitous humor, and great character work.
I failed my kid on his very first day in this world. And I've been failing him every day since.
Even though I love the show and can't recommend it enough, it is by no means perfect. And the third season is one I have the most qualms about, for a couple of reasons. Let's get into them. The season starts off with the aftermath of the school fight from the end of the second season. The LaRussos facing serious trouble at work. Their connection to karate and therefore the school fight has resulted in a PR disaster for the car dealership. Not only are the customers reluctant of doing business there, the car manufacturers are also distancing themselves from the LaRussos. In an attempt to solve this issue, Daniel spends the 4th and 5th episode in Japan. However, his meeting with the manufacturers is not successful, and he's at a loss on what to do next. And what comes next is a series of incredibly convenient coincidences. It turns out the key to solving his issues lies in turning to his past. And a random barkeeper, of all people, points him in this direction. If it wasn't for the barkeeper giving him unsolicited advice, he wouldn't have thought about going to Okinawa, and he couldn't have saved his company. If he didn't arrive in Okinawa at just the right time to meet Kumiko, who he hasn't seen in decades and didn't even know she still lives there, he could not have saved his company. If Kumiko didn't happen to know a high-ranking employee of the car manufacturer, he could not have saved his company. If Kumiko didn't have the letters of Mr. Miyagi to her aunt, Daniel would not have gotten back to the right outlook on life. If Kumiko wasn't still in contact with Chosen, Daniel wouldn't have learned about the Miyagi-Do techniques he needed going forward. The entire plotline is based on little to no cause and effect, but a lot of conveniences, and that's just not good enough.
That's not good enough!
During his time in Japan, Daniel goes on 2 different character journeys. On the first one, he's learning more about Miyagi-Do. Chosen broadens Daniel's fighting techniques, his understanding of self-defense, and the Miyagi-Do philosophy.
If an enemy insists on war, then you take away their ability to wage it. Eh?
On the second, he's learning more about Mr. Miyagi himself, about his inner feelings towards Yuki and what it meant for him to be part of Daniel's family. Those are important lessons for Daniel, which will eventually lead to him fighting back against Cobra Kai. In the meanwhile, the payoff for his actual goal in Japan is absolutely laughable. Up until the very last scene in Japan, Daniel hasn't made any progress in saving his company. But right at this point, Yuna comes in and saves the day.
A friend of yours?
A friend of ours.
Yuna?
You remember?
Are you kidding me? How could I forget?
Who is Yuna, you might ask? Good question.
What, you work for Doyona?
Senior Vice President of Sales for Doyona International.
So, Yuna, can I buy you a drink?
I should hope so, Daniel-san. I'm about to save your business.
This is literally her only scene in all of Cobra Kai, and she just solved a story arc of a main character worth half a season? There was no indication of Kumiko having any solution in any way. The initial problem ends up feeling like an excuse to get Daniel to Japan, and at the very end, a solution was just shoehorned in.
Why did you come back to Okinawa, Daniel-san?
I told you my business,
No.
setback.
Not anymore.
But putting the conveniences aside, I'm not a big fan of removing Daniel from the rest of the known cast and their plotlines for such a long time. I'm aware there are many people who love to see the characters they know from the second Karate Kid movie again. But when I started watching the show, I hadn't seen the old movies, and the show always made an effort to appeal to those new viewers like me. Honestly, at times even a little too much of an effort.
Sweep the leg. You have a problem with that?
No, Sensei.
Do I even want to know how often I've seen this flashback in Cobra Kai? Well, anyway. From my perspective, we are introduced to a whole set of new characters. And this is the first time the show fails to make me care about them properly. The only comparable storyline in terms of setup I can think of is Johnny's road trip with his old karate friends in the second season. The episode comes pretty much out of nowhere, but the integration of Johnny's old friends into the show was so much better. We had seen them before in Johnny's childhood flashbacks. They had a direct connection to Kreese, which was highly relevant for the story at that point, and one of them became a semi-regular in the show. But those quote-unquote random new characters are fixing Daniel's problems, and afterwards they're just gone, not to be seen again for about 2 seasons, while Daniel returns to LA as a better man. I'm not saying that all the scenes are bad, but the overall structure is just not satisfying. But if everything up to this point wasn't bad enough, the build-up towards the Japan story arc left a lot to be desired. Daniel has to go to Japan because his business is in danger, which sucks, no doubt about it. But in the prior season the car dealership was struggling as well. Nonetheless, the important conflict wasn't about the business itself, but what it represented. It was about Daniel's struggle to support Amanda at the dealership, instead of being at the dojo the entire time. It was about Daniel not making his marriage his priority in life.
Well, sometimes when you focus on one thing, you lose focus of everything else that matters. You put a band-aid on an open head wound.
What, our marriage is an open head wound?
In the third season, Daniel's conflict could have been about his struggle to be there for his students, while also fighting for the survival of his business. Something like that. But that was obviously made impossible because he stopped teaching his students altogether. But I think that's how the car dealership should be utilized, as a means to an end, as a tool to facilitate the story. And that's the case in all the other seasons. Robbie gets taught karate through his tasks at the dealership. Daniel fails Amanda at the dealership. Whenever someone needs a car, the writers find a way to get them one from the dealership. I could go on and on. At the end of the day, I don't care too much about the dealership itself. Unlike the dojo, for example, the dealership is pretty much interchangeable, and moving on from it wouldn't have been the end of the world to me. But it can serve as a great tool to facilitate other plotlines. But now it's supposed to be about the dealership itself. Daniel and Amanda have this one conversation in which he explains how founding his own business and doing the very best to work for his customers was his dream and he doesn't want to lose it. It would mean the end of his life's work. In the meanwhile, Amanda explains if they don't sell now, they might end up with nothing. But that's about it. But next thing we know, Daniel is in Japan, and after 2 or 3 scenes, saving the dealership is nothing but an afterthought. If the show wants to go that way, it should do more with it. Remember, 1 season earlier Daniel screwed up his business because all he had in mind was teaching karate.
I spent the entire summer feeling alone while you're out at karate camp.
There was no external threat to his business. He put it in danger himself. This happened about a month earlier.
This is about you not being able to keep your promises.
What I remember most about that night was sitting in the back seat of that car, just you and me mapping out our future.
Now he's saying selling cars is actually his dream. But if selling cars is his dream, it shouldn't feel interchangeable for me. And if you might end up with nothing if you neither sell immediately nor manage to save the dealership, the audience should feel the consequences. I never got the feeling of them becoming financially desperate. Amanda, for example, could raise the idea of selling the Miyagi-Do property to stay afloat, to the pushback of Daniel, putting his dream of selling cars against his passion for karate. And while he's in Japan, Amanda never seems worried. And Sam is even happy about him being away, because it means the kids can practice karate again. At the end of the day, the whole trip feels half-cooked at best. The writers probably had some idea what they wanted to do as soon as Daniel is with Kumiko and Chosen in Okinawa, but didn't bother to get him to that point in a satisfying way. In addition to all of the other plotlines in Season 3, we are also previewed to John Kreese's perspective of the Vietnam War. His time in battle played a major role in shaping his character. But whenever one of those flashbacks come up, I'm like, oh, really?
I don't want it.
Admittedly, a significant portion of this point might come down to personal preference. But it's not even that I dislike the flashbacks in itself. Granted, they are not my favorite scenes by any means, especially the early ones. But for the most part they are fine in a vacuum, and the climax of the Kreese backstory is actually pretty exciting. The scenes are also nicely integrated into the Cobra Kai lessons, giving the viewer the context as to why Kreese teaches the way he does. And just like Daniel's trip to Japan, they are setting up characters who will be important at a later point in the series. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? Well, maybe I would have been fine with either Daniel's time in Japan or the Kreese flashbacks, but to have both in the same season feels like such a drag. There are so many storylines I want to see. How is Robbie holding up in prison? And how will his relationship with Johnny continue? What does Miguel's recovery look like? How will the whole Miguel, Robbie and Sam situation play out? Just to name a few. There are so many great storylines in this season, but whenever there's a flashback, the story just slows down and comes to a complete halt. But there's also something really strange about the flashbacks. They paint a picture of a tragic life, the life of a man we can empathize with. Bullying and the death of his girlfriend led him into dark places in life. This is where it draws his ideals from. Strike first, strike hard, no mercy. The world doesn't show mercy and neither should you. The show implies his time in Vietnam is what led Kreese to become the cruel person we've gotten to know. But in another storyline, the story makes the point that having a hard life doesn't give you the right to be a horrible person.
Everybody's got a sob story. It doesn't give you a right to be a bully.
Maybe that's a contradiction we are supposed to pick up on, but it feels like I'm supposed to sympathize with him because of his tragic backstory. But I really don't. Interestingly enough, I sympathize with Kreese in flashbacks of the later seasons. Because in those he doesn't come across as a ruthless person, but rather as someone who genuinely cares about his students and his friends. But if the earlier flashbacks already showed us how he became such a cruel person, then they are at odds with one another, which might just be the fault of the later seasons. But I wanted to mention it because it illustrates my problem with the third season even more. I mentioned Miguel and his recovery earlier on, and first of all I was extremely happy to see such stark consequences at the end of the second season. Going into the third season, Miguel is in for a hard journey, getting back on his feet and building up the strength to fight again. Along the way there are many heartbreaking as well as beautiful scenes. For example, there's this wonderful scene in which Carmen is crying and Johnny checks up on her. After telling her Miguel will walk again, she tells Johnny all she wants right now is to see Miguel smile again. A simple moment of a mother wanting nothing but the best for her child. But when I first heard that, I immediately thought that we only had seen Miguel in one scene interacting with his friends since the accident. No wonder he isn't smiling. There's also the scene in which Miguel watches a clip of the Cobra Kai training on his phone, and he's visibly frustrated after seeing the other kids training while he's stuck in the hospital. I would have liked if they leaned a bit more into it. Have him around his friends a bit more, and he tries to fit in, but ultimately he can't because of his injury. Despite their best effort, his injury creates a distance between him and his friends. So far Miguel's story may not be exactly what I envisioned, but the actual plot isn't bad by any means. After a long process of getting back on his feet, he starts getting back into karate with the newly found eagle fangs. But it seems that the road back to the top will be at least as long as his journey of getting back to his feet.
Hey, you don't think I can do it?
You almost hurt yourself with one kick. One kick! Look, you already proved you could win.
And I need to prove it again.
Now that's a potential character arc worthy of a whole season. The next season could have easily been about him overcoming his injury, and to retain the conflict we know and love from season 4, both Eagle Fang Karate and Miyagi-Do could have played a role in making him an even better fighter than he was before. Going back to season 3, in the final episode, a big fight between the Cobra Kais and the Miyagi-Dos and Eagle Fangs breaks out at the LaRussos, and Miguel gets absolutely manhandled by Kyler. But apparently this is supposed to be the end of Miguel's recovery arc. He goes from 50 to 100% after seeing Hawk switching sides and having a motivational memory speech from Johnny. And listen, I like motivational speeches, or memories of those speeches for that matter, as much as the next guy. But we get 3 of those in this episode, and in my opinion the only one that makes really sense is the one Sam has, because she has to overcome a mental barrier and getting in the right space of mind is actually what she needs. Miguel, however, is past his mental challenge. Regaining his martial prowess is very much a physical challenge, and getting some extra motivation after seeing Hawk switching sides wants help of that. So to me the recovery arc falls short right at the finish line, because we reached the finish line way too early. Speaking of Hawk, I'm somewhat torn on his turn, because I appreciate these subtle little moments throughout the season in which we see Hawk being conflicted regarding his actions. You can see the conflict in his eyes, at times you can see his hesitation, but in the end the peer pressure always prevails, and that's great. But for every of those scenes we also have a scene of Hawk being the first to stand up for Cobra Kai. And it's not hard to imagine why. After joining Cobra Kai, he felt a sense of belonging. For the first time in his life, he was part of a group. Cobra Kai made him strong, it gave him power over his former bullies. It made him confident, getting him his first girlfriend. But over time he realizes he's also hurting his old friends, and he knows that's wrong. It begins to dawn on him that not everything about his old life was bad. And now he's actively destroying the connection to his past because of his obsession with Cobra Kai. In the meanwhile, his closest friends he had in Cobra Kai are leaving one after another while he stays behind. What started out as a good thing went south very quickly, but he refuses to accept that things are getting out of hand. His commitment to Cobra Kai is never more obvious than when he's leading the storming of the LaRusso house. But just a few moments later, after he already beat up a few kids, he decides to change sides. In conclusion, Hawk's decision to change sides in the final episode happens way too fast for my liking. Keep in mind the consequences of him changing sides are pretty dire. He's well aware he will be considered a traitor and outcast by his current friends in Cobra Kai, while running the risk of not being welcomed back by his former friends. And that's pretty much what happens in season 4. He isn't welcomed back with open arms, but has to work hard to regain the trust of the Eagle Fangs and the Miyagi-Dos.
Go back with your little eagle game. Not one of you.
What?
I don't know where I fit in here.
Well, what did you expect? You burned bridges with pretty much everyone here.
Hawk earns his redemption retroactively, which doesn't completely fix the mistakes of the 3rd season. The damage has been done, but they are sufficiently repaired. Therefore, this is by far the least problematic point on this list, mainly because season 4 makes good on the shortcomings of the prior season. Alright, that's the big one. Johnny in episode 9 and 10. So let me set a scene. At the end of episode 8, Carmen and Johnny hook up.
So, your mom and I are hooking up.
But at the beginning of episode 9, they are not sure where to go from there. Are they a couple now? Was this just a one-night stand? They decide to talk about the whole situation later on the day.
So where do we go from here?
I don't know.
Maybe we can talk more when I get home?
Definitely.
Okay.
Is this some kind of Schrödinger's one-night stand? Until you had to talk, the sex was both meaningful and not meaningful at the same time? Either way, going on a date with someone else should be off limits until the two of them figure things out. This shouldn't be an issue since we are only talking about a time frame of 10 hours, maybe 12, I don't know. But from what I know about Johnny and Carmen, I would assume they agree with me. However, as soon as Carmen leaves for work, Johnny receives a text from Ellie. She wants to meet up with him. And you can clearly see how Johnny is conflicted when he looks up from the text and sees Carmen leaving. But he meets her anyway. So far so good, nothing wrong with meeting old friends for lunch. But unfortunately, the meeting turns into a date very quickly. Remember when Johnny dumped his date in season 2 because he couldn't stand how Graham was flirting with another woman while being with Carmen? And now he confronts the guy about it? Has anyone seen that Johnny? Because he went missing. Now he's the one who sleeps with Carmen and couldn't even wait half a day before going out with another woman. You hypocritical garbage human.
I mean, I'm not the only one who's getting back together with an ex, huh, Sensei? He had a date with the love of his life.
It's not like that, you know. I mean, we're just old friends catching up.
That would be great if it was true, but the problem is, it was exactly like that. It might have started out as catching up with a friend, and I'll be honest, most of the scenes are innocent enough, so there is nothing wrong with those. But there are also the scenes which are not fine at all, and those are the moments that matter. Think of a criminal for a second. 95% of the time he isn't doing anything illegal, yet we care about the 5% of him committing crime. And those are the actions which define him. And the same goes for Johnny in this situation. And the only reason Johnny didn't kiss her later on was because her phone rang. After looking at her phone, Ellie realizes she has to go. But she doesn't leave without inviting Johnny to a Christmas party. At this point, Johnny should already have realized things are getting out of hand. He almost kissed Ellie, and now he plans to go on a fancy party with her? Even if this is the moment he realizes he can't commit to Carmen, I think he still owes it to Carmen to tell her, before spending any more time with Ellie. But he goes home, gets changed, and goes to the party without a second thought. Once he got there, he even brags about being with Ellie the entire day to Daniel. This is obviously a competition to him.
Lunch? Yeah. Made plans. Together. Spent all day. Together.
Please, don't compete for a woman if you are already with someone. Thank you. They proceed to spend the rest of the evening together until they eventually go their ways. If you paused the show when they are about to leave and told me Ellie was about to invite Johnny home and they'd leave together, I would believe you. But instead, this happens?
So who is this hot lady I hear you've been seeing?
What the hell?
Oh, you didn't screw up today.
Yes, you did. Just because you were interrupted doesn't mean you weren't about to screw it up. Am I going crazy right now? Is the show gaslighting me? Just imagine this was your boyfriend or girlfriend. You saw them in this situation. I'm pretty sure your reaction wouldn't be, "Whew, that was pretty close, but luckily nothing bad happened." Let's be real here, I think this is worse than the Sam and Miguel incident. Or the other Sam and Miguel incident. And the Miguel and Robbie incident. And basically all the other incidents I can think of. Not because it was the worst action in itself, but because the intent and the reaction to the deed matters a whole lot. Let's see if you can spot the difference.
No, we shouldn't have. With Tori, you have...
I'm sorry. I have to go.
I really have to go. No, I'd much rather stay here with you.
It's all right, don't worry about it, I get it.
Do you want to come? Save me from the boredom?
You sure?
Hell yeah, I'm sure.
But now it gets even more confusing. After hanging out with Ellie and almost making out with her, Johnny recognizes he wants to be with Carmen. I don't even know what to say about this, because it's just nonsensical.
Really
this.
I did too.
They act like they had some profound experience. In the meanwhile, I feel dumbfounded because this is too stupid to even make an argument against.
Carmen, I figured it out. I'm ready. I love you.
If you need to hang out with your high school sweetheart right after having sex with the woman you're supposedly having feelings for, I don't think you're in a position to tell her that you love her. All of this is not normal. This is not normal. This is not moral. This isn't good. And on top of everything else, please remember, Carmen is Miguel's mother. And there's no doubt Johnny has become something pretty close to a father figure to him. By having a one-night stand with one another, they are putting the family environment Miguel is growing up in at risk. In season 4, we'll see Miguel and Johnny struggle to have the same connection to one another after Carmen and Johnny become official. I can't even imagine how much worse things could have become if Johnny and Carmen ended up being at odds with one another, putting Miguel in a really awkward situation. What they are doing is just incredibly irresponsible.
You're my son's teacher. I'm not sure how this works.
Me neither. I don't want to screw things up with Miguel.
I don't want that either.
And with Johnny trying to be a better father, one could argue that he should have an increased interest in ensuring the kids for whom he is responsible are brought up in a stable environment, especially if you consider what Robbie's upbringing looked like.
Okay, you caught me. I am going out, but you know, it is 9 LA week, so. Listen, I know that you're super bummed out about tonight, but, you know, I'm trying to meet that special someone.
One could also argue that he hasn't developed the level of awareness yet and that I'm just projecting my own moral perspective on him. I'm honestly not entirely sure about that. Going forward, I basically have to ignore those 2 episodes, which luckily is somewhat possible since the Johnny and Carmen arc is a B-plot at best and the Ellie plotline doesn't get brought up all that often. So, is this season a complete letdown? Not at all. Despite its disappointing shortcomings, there's still a lot of good to be found. I already mentioned some of the storylines I prefer to the Kreese flashbacks, but even the last episode, for which I have made my aversion pretty clear, ends on a high note with Johnny confronting Robbie, resulting in the most unique fight of the entire show. And speaking of Robbie, he really starts to shine in his role, and going into season 4, he is about to absolutely steal the show. And besides, the fights are still fun, and the show makes me laugh all the time.
First, we need to get some pictures. Do you have any photos?
Yeah, photos? Yeah, don't move.
Okay.
Said don't move.